All right, the first technique we're going to be talking about is volume. And volume is by far the most important technique in mixing. Anyone can tell you that it's EQ, compression. No, it's volume. Volume is what everything comes down to, and almost all the mixing mistakes that I see comes down to volume. With the people that I've worked with, it's always volume. So, how can we think about using volume in our mixing, right? Well, it all comes down to that one key component of prioritization. You have your list of priorities, right? You made that list in the notebook, so now you can go through and see what the most important elements are and work your way down. Now, say your most important element was your vocal, right? We're using volume, so your vocal should be the loudest thing in your mix. And basically, what you're going to do is make that the loudest, and then you're going to go down your list of priorities, right? Say your kick is number 2, right? You want that to be slightly less than the vocal, but nothing should get louder than the vocal, at least not for very long. If you have something creative you're doing, then fine. But you've created this list of priorities, and now it's all about balancing it in terms of volume. So generally, the most important elements in a song, just to give you a frame of ideas, your most important elements are going to be your vocal, your kick, your bass, and your leads. And we're going to be going over that more in depth later on, but I'd say some more supporting mid supporting elements I'd say up next would be like claps, percussion, chords, and mid bass, and then lastly you got your ambient stuff like ear candy, ambiance, and all those should be the quietest. And basically you're going to be balancing all of these with volume to make sure that they're all following that list of priorities that you created in the beginning. And this is going to create a much more balanced mix that's going to be much more pleasing to the ear, because everything you want to stand out will be the loudest, and everything you want to be the quietest will be the quietest. One note I want to make about volume is that if you have an element that you keep lowering because it's low on your list of priorities, and you keep bringing it down in volume and it's not really adding much to the track, try removing it just to see how it sounds. If it ruined your track, then leave it. But if it's not doing anything for your track, it might be a good idea to take it away, because if you have too many elements in your song, it's going to create what most people call the muddy mix. Too much mud, like a bunch of clumpy sounds, because mixing is all about doing as much as you can with as little as possible. So if you have too many sounds, then it's not going to sound very clean. So if you have an element that's not really doing much when you lower it in volume, consider taking it out and see how that affects the overall balance of your track. Another note I want to talk about with volume is essentially that in addition to following your list of priorities, I'd say that a lot of your problems that you may not think are volume are actually volume. So for example, say you got a song and someone says your kick doesn't stand out enough, right? Now you may want to say add a top kick, or increase like around 1k hertz on the EQ, or add a compressor and really make it smack or whatever. But I bet money that if you were to turn your volume up a little bit, make it stand out more, a lot of problems can be resorted all the way to volume, and you may not even realize. Some people say that their break sounds louder than their chorus or their drop, right? And that messes up the arrangement. A very simple trick to fix that is simply to turn the break down and turn the drop up. It doesn't need to be a very complex thing. Most problems can come back to volume, and worry about the other complex stuff later on, but really make sure you've got your volume on lock before you even think about anything, because it's going to solve a lot of problems down the road. One thing to really keep in mind when you're moving forward in your song is how each plugin is affecting the gain and volume of your track. So every time you add a plugin, it has the capacity to alter your signal in some way, and not just like the way the plugin is designed to. For example, reverb might make your sound a little quieter because it's putting it in a space, right? So you really need to keep in mind as you go through the track volume and gain changes that are coming up, and adjust accordingly. And it's a good habit to plan ahead for this. So starting out at a lower decibel rate with all of your tracks, so that way you don't encounter problems later on where everything is clipping. This is a great way to avoid clipping later on and make it easier to create headroom for your mix and master in the end, because you'll have already been planning ahead in your production phase for gain changes that come with plugins. And also, one thing to note is that plugins can affect how we think if something like the gain or volume changes, how we think the quality of the sound changes. For example, you put a compressor on a track and the makeup knob has it feeling louder, right? But it doesn't mean that the compressor did its job. It just means that we're trained to think louder is better. So really pay attention to how volume and gain changes are appearing throughout your track with new plugins. That way you can plan ahead, avoid clipping, and make sure that you're getting the best quality sound possible and achieving your balance.